I'm Marcus Rivera, 34. A software engineer who served 3 tours in Afghanistan before trading my combat boots for a corporate cubicle. After 2 years of exemplary performance at TechFlow Solutions, my supervisor Jake dismissed my weekend National Guard duties as playing Army and terminated me for unreliability. The betrayal cut deep, not just because I'd given this company everything, but because I'd survived IEDs and firefights only to be ambushed by office politics. What Jake didn't know was that my weekend warrior activities included earning a Purple Heart after saving my squad from a roadside bomb that nearly cost me my leg. As I cleaned out my desk, fighting back tears of rage and humiliation, I had no idea that our CEO was about to walk through that door. The next 3 minutes would change everything, not just for me, but for every veteran who'd ever been misunderstood. In corporate America, if you've ever felt dismissed or undervalued for your service, subscribe for more stories of hidden strength and ultimate justice. The sound of heels clicking against the polished floor made Jake straighten his shoulders. Sarah Chen, our CEO, rounded the corner with her usual purposeful stride. Her sharp business suit a stark contrast to the casual Friday atmosphere that permeated the rest of the office. "Jake, what's happening here?" Her voice carried that authoritative tone that had built TechFlow Solutions from a startup into a multi-million-dollar company. She glanced between my half-empty desk and Jake's self-satisfied expression. Jake puffed out his chest like a peacock, showing off his feathers. "Sarah, I'm glad you're here. I've just terminated Marcus Rivera for chronic unreliability and poor time management. He's been consistently absent on weekends, claiming military obligations, but frankly, I think he's just playing soldier." The words hit me like a physical blow. Playing soldier. As if my service meant nothing. As if the weekends I spent training young soldiers, preparing them for deployment, helping them understand the weight of the uniform they wore, as if all of that was some kind of elaborate game. I kept my face neutral, drawing on the discipline that had been drilled into me during basic training. Never show weakness, never let them see you break. But inside, I was crumbling. 2 years of 60-hour weeks of debugging code until my eyes burned, of mentoring junior developers and consistently exceeding every metric they threw at me, of it dismissed in a single moment. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she studied the termination letter Jake had thrust into her hands. Unreliability. Marcus has never missed a deadline. His performance reviews are exemplary. Weekend availability is crucial for our agile development process, Jake continued, his voice gaining confidence. We can't have team members who prioritize hobby activities over professional commitments. Hobby activities? The phrase made my jaw clench involuntarily. I thought about the 18-year-old kid from Oklahoma I'd worked with last weekend, scared out of his mind about his upcoming deployment. I thought about the training exercises that kept our unit sharp, ready to respond to disasters or threats. I thought about the commitment I'd made to serve my country, a commitment that didn't end just because I'd traded my combat boots for dress shoes. Sarah's gaze shifted to me, and I saw something I hadn't expected: curiosity mixed with what looked like concern. "Marcus, is there something you'd like to say about this?" For a moment, I considered defending myself, explaining the truth about my National Guard service, about the legal protections that Jake had apparently never bothered to learn about. But what was the point? My military bearing kicked in, and I straightened my shoulders. "No, ma'am. I'll have my desk cleared within the hour." Jake's smile widened, clearly pleased with what he interpreted as submission. He had no idea that my calm acceptance wasn't defeat. It was the discipline of someone who had learned to assess situations before reacting, to maintain composure under pressure. As I reached for the small wooden box containing my personal items, Sarah's attention seemed drawn to something specific among my belongings. Her expression shifted subtly, a flicker of recognition crossing her features. "Jake, I'd like to speak with you privately in 5 minutes," she said, her voice carrying a new edge. "Marcus, please don't finish packing just yet." The weight of my combat boots had never felt heavier than on my first day at TechFlow Solutions. I'd polished them one last time before storing them in my closet, trading them for the leather loafers that seemed to be the uniform of the corporate world. The transition from Sergeant Rivera to Software Engineer Rivera hadn't been easy, but I'd thought I'd finally found my place. 3 tours in Afghanistan had taught me more about leadership, problem-solving, and working under pressure than any MBA program ever could. When an IED went off during my second deployment, I'd made split-second decisions that saved lives. When our forward operating base came under attack during my 3rd tour, I'd coordinated our defense while wounded, ensuring every member of my squad made it home. Those experiences had forged me into someone who could handle anything corporate America might throw at me, or so I'd thought. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd survived roadside bombs and Taliban fighters, only to be taken down by office politics, and a supervisor who saw my military service as a liability rather than an asset. Jake had never understood why I approached problems methodically, why I double-checked everything, why I insisted on clear communication protocols. He'd never been in a situation where a miscommunication could cost lives. My National Guard service wasn't a hobby, it was a continuation of my commitment to serve Every weekend, I trained alongside men and women who were preparing for deployment, who needed experienced NCOs to guide them through the realities of military life. I taught them how to read terrain, how to spot potential threats, how to maintain their equipment. I helped them understand that their actions in theater would have consequences far beyond their individual experiences. During my active duty years, I'd learned that leadership wasn't about barking orders or asserting dominance, it was about taking care of your people. When Private Johnson had nightmares about his first firefight, I'd sat with him in the mess hall at 0300, sharing stories and helping him process the trauma. When Specialist Martinez was struggling with marksmanship, I'd spent my off-duty hours on the range with her until she could hit her targets consistently. The IED that had changed my life went off on a routine patrol in Helmand Province. I was the squad leader, responsible for 9 other soldiers who trusted me to bring them home safely. We'd been checking on a local school that had been receiving threats from insurgents. As we approached the building, something felt wrong. The streets were too quiet, the usual sounds of daily life conspicuously absent. I'd held up my hand, stopping the patrol, when I noticed the disturbed earth near the school's entrance. Fresh dirt, carefully arranged but not quite natural. My training kicked in, and I was already moving toward the suspicious area when the blast threw me 15 feet backward. The explosion shattered my left leg and left me with shrapnel wounds across my torso, but my quick identification of the threat had saved my entire squad from walking directly into the kill zone. For weeks afterward, as I recovered in a military hospital in Germany, I'd questioned whether my split-second decision had been the right one. The Purple Heart ceremony had felt surreal, receiving recognition for doing what any NCO would have done, protecting the soldiers under my command. But the medal represented more than just that single moment of decision. It symbolized the accumulation of training, experience, and commitment that had prepared me to act when it mattered most. The transition to civilian life had been jarring. The corporate world operated on different principles, different timelines, different measures of success, but I'd adapted, applying the same discipline and attention to detail that had served me in the military to my new career in software development. I'd thought my colleagues would appreciate the leadership skills I'd developed, the ability to remain calm under pressure, the commitment to excellence that the military had instilled in me. Instead, I'd encountered Jake, a manager who seemed threatened by anyone who didn't fit his narrow definition of what a tech professional should be. He'd made subtle comments about my military mindset being too rigid for the creative demands of software development. He'd questioned my priorities when I'd had to leave early for mandatory training exercises. He'd dismissed my suggestions for improving team communication and project management as too structured for their agile environment. What Jake had never understood was that my military service hadn't made me rigid, it had made me adaptable. In combat, you learn to improvise, to find creative solutions to impossible problems, to work effectively with people from vastly different backgrounds. Those skills had made me a better developer, a better teammate, a better leader. But as I sat in that office, watching Jake's smug expression as he handed me my termination letter, I realized that none of that mattered. In his mind, I was just a weekend warrior who couldn't prioritize properly, someone whose commitment to continued service was an inconvenience to be eliminated. The injustice of it burned. But I'd learned long ago that showing anger rarely solved problems. Instead, I'd maintain my composure, pack my belongings with dignity, and figure out my next move. The military had taught me that setbacks were temporary, that adaptation and persistence were the keys to long-term success. I had no idea that my small wooden box of personal items contained something that would change everything. Sarah Chen's eyes had locked onto something in my personal effects box, and I watched her expression shift from professional curiosity to something much deeper. She reached toward the small velvet case that contained my Purple Heart certificate, then stopped herself, looking up at me with a question in her eyes. "May I?" she asked quietly. I nodded, unsure where this was heading, but sensing that something significant was about to happen. Jake stood beside her, his earlier confidence beginning to waver as he watched our CEO handle my belongings with unexpected reverence. Sarah carefully lifted the certificate from its protective case. The official document, signed by the Secretary of the Army, bore the distinctive purple and gold seal that marked it as authentic. She read it silently, her lips moving slightly as she processed the formal language that described my service and sacrifice. "For wounds received in action against an enemy of the United States," she read aloud, her voice carrying new weight. "Afghanistan, 2019. Jake's face went pale. I had no idea." "No," Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp. "You had no idea because you never bothered to ask. You never bothered to learn about the man you just fired." She turned back to me, the certificate still in her hands. "Marcus, would you mind telling me what happened?" The question hung in the air between us. I'd told this story before, to medical personnel, to investigators, to family members who needed to understand why I'd come home different than when I'd left. But telling it here, in this corporate office where I'd just been fired for my military service, felt different. My squad was conducting a routine patrol near a school in Helmand Province. I began, my voice steady despite the memories flooding back. Local intel suggested insurgents were planning to attack the building. As we approached, something felt wrong. The area was too quiet, and I noticed signs of recently disturbed earth near the entrance. Jake was staring at me now, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by something that looked like dawning comprehension. Sarah remained focused, her business executive mask slipping to reveal genuine human concern. I was moving to investigate when the eye detonated. The blast threw me backward and shattered my left leg. I took shrapnel in my torso and shoulder. I paused, remembering the moment of confusion that followed the explosion. The ringing in my ears, the taste of dust and blood. But my early identification of the threat meant my squad avoided the kill zone. 9 soldiers went home to their families because of those extra seconds. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Sarah carefully placed the certificate back in its case, her movements deliberate and respectful. "And your National Guard service now?" she asked. "I train new soldiers preparing for deployment. I help them understand what they'll face, how to stay alive, how to bring their buddies home." I met her eyes directly. "It's not a hobby, ma'am. It's a continuation of my commitment to serve." Jake had been shifting uncomfortably throughout this exchange, and now he attempted to regain control of the situation. "Look, I appreciate my service, but that doesn't change the fact that he's not available when the team needs him. We have deadlines, client expectations. Stop talking." Sarah's voice cut through his explanation like a blade. "Just stop talking right now." The command in her tone was absolute, and Jake's mouth snapped shut. I recognized the authority in her voice. It was the same tone I'd used when a situation required immediate compliance, when lives depended on someone following orders without question. "Marcus," Sarah said, turning back to me, "I need you to understand something. This company has never discriminated against military service members. We've never fired someone for fulfilling their National Guard obligations, and we're not going to start now." She picked up the termination letter that Jake had prepared, and I watched in fascination as she tore it in half, then in half again. The pieces fluttered to the floor like confetti, each fragment representing a different aspect of the injustice I'd just experienced. "Your termination is void," she announced. "You're still an employee of TechFlow Solutions, with full pay and benefits. We'll discuss your role going forward, but first I need to address the complete failure of leadership that led to this situation." Jake's face had gone from pale to ashen. "Sarah, I was just trying to maintain team cohesion. You were discriminating against a decorated veteran who has consistently exceeded every performance metric we have," she replied, her voice cold. "You were violating federal law, company policy, and basic human decency. And you were doing it with a smugness that suggests you thought you were untouchable." The transformation in the room was palpable. Minutes earlier, I'd been the one facing termination, packing my belongings and preparing to leave in disgrace. Now Jake was the one who looked like he might be sick, while Sarah stood between us like an avenging angel. "Ma'am," I said quietly, "I appreciate your support, but I don't want special treatment because of my military service. I want to be judged on my work, my contributions to the team." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Marcus, you're not getting special treatment. You're getting the treatment that every employee deserves, to be evaluated fairly, to have your commitments respected, and to work in an environment free from discrimination." She turned her attention back to Jake, and I saw something in her eyes that I recognized from my military days, the cold fury of a leader who had just discovered that one of their subordinates had betrayed everything they stood for. "Jake, we need to talk now." Sarah's investigation into my termination uncovered a pattern that went far deeper than one supervisor's bias. As she pulled my personnel file, the evidence of discrimination became undeniable. Every performance review I'd received had been exemplary, with ratings that consistently placed me in the top 10% of the development team. My project completion rates exceeded department averages by 23%. Client satisfaction scores for systems I'd designed and implemented were among the highest in company history. Yet Jake's notes painted a different picture entirely. Margin comments suggested I was inflexible and too focused on procedures. My requests for schedule adjustments to accommodate mandatory National Guard training were characterized as frequent absences and reliability issues. Most damning of all, Jake had documented conversations that I was certain had never taken place. Meetings where he claimed I'd shown insubordination and resistance to collaborative feedback. "How long has this been going on?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with controlled anger as she spread the documents across her desk. "Since Jake became my supervisor 18 months ago," I replied, studying the fabricated narrative he'd constructed. "The first few months were fine, but once he realized I had ongoing military obligations, his attitude changed completely." Sarah was making notes on a legal pad, her pen moving rapidly as she documented the discrepancies. "Have you filed any complaints with HR?" "No, ma'am. I thought I could handle it professionally, work through the personality conflict." I paused, recognizing how naive that sounded in retrospect. "In the military, you learn to adapt to different leadership styles. I assumed this was just another challenging supervisor situation." "This isn't a personality conflict, Marcus. This is systematic discrimination." Sarah pulled another file from her desk drawer. I've been reviewing other veterans' employment records. The pattern is consistent across Jake's entire department. She showed me performance evaluations for 3 other employees who had military backgrounds. David Chen, a Navy veteran who did weekend reserve duty, had received increasingly negative reviews despite maintaining high productivity. Maria Santos, an Air Force veteran who occasionally needed time off for VA appointments, had been placed on a performance improvement plan after 2 years of stellar evaluations. Tommy Wu, a Marine veteran who had served in Iraq, had been denied promotion twice despite meeting all qualifications. This is a clear violation of the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act, Sarah continued. USERRA specifically protects service members from discrimination based on their military obligations. Jake has created a hostile work environment for veterans, and I'm betting he's been careful to document false justifications for his actions. The scope of the discrimination was staggering. Jake hadn't just targeted me, he'd systematically undermined every veteran in his department, creating a culture where military service was seen as a liability rather than an asset. He'd exploited his position to push out employees whose dedication to continued service conflicted with his narrow vision of corporate loyalty. The legal implications are severe, Sarah said, her business mind clearly calculating the potential damage. Class action lawsuits, federal investigations, damage to our reputation. Jake has exposed this company to millions in liability. But beyond the legal ramifications, I could see that Sarah was personally offended by what she'd discovered. TechFlow Solutions had built its reputation on innovation and integrity. The company's marketing materials emphasized their commitment to diversity and inclusion, their support for employees' personal growth and development. Jake's actions had corrupted those values, turning them into empty corporate speak. There's something else, Sarah said, pulling out a folder marked confidential. Jake's been in contact with several recruiting firms, apparently trying to replace veterans with what he calls more dedicated employees. He's been using company resources to actively discriminate against a protected class. The documentation was comprehensive and damning. Email chains showed Jake discussing strategies to eliminate weekend warriors and focus on employees who can commit fully to company priorities. He'd even consulted with outside legal counsel about ways to terminate military personnel without obvious cause. He's been planning this for months, I realized. Studying the timeline of communications, my termination wasn't an impulsive decision, it was part of a systematic campaign. Sarah nodded grimly, and he's been careful to document false justifications for every action, performance issues that don't exist, attendance problems that are actually protected military service, reliability concerns that have no basis in fact. As we continued reviewing the evidence, I felt a familiar anger building, not the hot fury of betrayal, but the cold determination that had sustained me through combat deployments. Jake hadn't just attacked me personally, he'd attacked the values that defined my service, the commitment that had cost me blood and pain and sleepless nights. What happens now? I asked. Sarah's expression hardened. Now we fix this. Completely and permanently. She gathered the documents into a neat stack. First, we're going to make sure you and every other veteran in this company receives the respect and support you deserve. Second, we're going to implement policies and training that prevent this from ever happening again. And third, we're going to hold Jake accountable for every decision he's made. She stood and walked to her window, looking out at the corporate campus that employed nearly 1,000 people. I built this company on the principle that talent and dedication come in many forms. Veterans bring unique skills, perspectives, and values that make us stronger. Jake's prejudice has corrupted that vision, and I won't tolerate it for another moment. The conversation had revealed the depth of the problem, but it had also shown me something else, that not all corporate leaders were like Jake. Some understood the value of military service, the importance of diversity, the necessity of creating environments where all employees could thrive. There's one more thing, Sarah said, turning back to me. I want you to know that this company stands behind your service, your sacrifice, and your continued commitment to the National Guard. We're going to make sure that message is clear to every employee, every manager, every person who walks through our doors. The weight of validation, of having my service truly recognized and valued, was almost overwhelming. For 18 months, I'd wondered if I was being too sensitive, if my military background really did make me a poor fit for corporate culture. Now I understood that the problem had never been with my service. It had been with a supervisor who couldn't see past his own prejudices. Sarah's office felt different as she reached for the small silver-framed photograph on her desk. Her usual corporate composure had softened, replaced by something more personal, more vulnerable. She turned the frame toward me, revealing a black and white image of a young man in an army uniform, his serious expression radiating the quiet confidence I recognized in veteran soldiers. My father, Captain James Chen, 1st Cavalry Division, she said, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and old pain. He served 2 tours in Vietnam, came home to protests and scorn instead of gratitude. He never talked much about his service, but I grew up watching him struggle with the disconnect between his military values and civilian expectations. I studied the photograph, seeing the family resemblance in the determined set of the jaw, the intelligent eyes. He looks like a good soldier. He was. He earned a Bronze Star for valor, though he never displayed it, never talked about what he'd done to earn it. For years I thought he was ashamed of his service. Sarah's fingers traced the edge of the frame. It wasn't until I was in college that I understood he wasn't ashamed. He was protecting us from the burden of knowing what he'd sacrificed. The revelation added layers to Sarah's reaction that I hadn't expected. Her fury at Jake's discrimination wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. She'd watched her father navigate the same prejudices, the same assumptions about military service that had shaped my own corporate experience. After Vietnam, Dad struggled to find work. Employers saw his military background as a liability, evidence of instability or violence. He'd been a communications specialist, responsible for coordinating complex operations under extreme pressure, but civilian employers couldn't see past the stereotypes. Sarah set the photograph back on her desk, positioning it carefully. He eventually found work as an engineer, but he never forgot how he'd been treated by people who'd never worn the uniform. I understood now why Sarah had torn up my termination letter with such vehemence. She'd seen this story before, lived with its consequences, watched someone she loved struggle against the very prejudices that Jake had displayed. Dad taught me that military service represents something rare in our society, a willingness to subordinate personal interests to something larger than yourself. He said that veterans bring qualities to civilian organizations that can't be taught in business school: genuine leadership, tested integrity, the ability to perform under pressure. Sarah's voice strengthened as she spoke. He would have been disgusted by Jake's actions, by the waste of talent and the betrayal of values. The family connection explained Sarah's immediate recognition of my Purple Heart certificate, her instinctive understanding of its significance. She'd grown up in a household where military service was honored, where the costs of that service were understood and respected. Your father sounds like a man of principle, I said. He built his own engineering firm on the principle that character matters more than credentials, that diversity of experience strengthens teams. Sarah smiled at the memory. He hired veterans whenever possible, not out of charity, but because he understood the value they brought to complex problems. She opened her laptop and pulled up what appeared to be a company organizational chart. TechFlow Solutions has 47 employees with military backgrounds, scattered across every department. Until today, I assumed they were all being supported appropriately. Jake's actions have shown me how wrong I was. The scope of potential discrimination was staggering. If Jake had systematically undermined veterans in his department, what was happening in other areas of the company? How many talented employees had been overlooked, undervalued, or driven away because of prejudices that went unchallenged? My father died 5 years ago, Sarah continued, but not before he saw me build TechFlow into something he could be proud of. He believed that successful organizations harness the full potential of their people, regardless of background or experience. Jake's actions have violated that fundamental principle. I could see the weight of inheritance in Sarah's expression, the responsibility she felt to honor her father's values while protecting employees who shared his background. The discrimination I'd experienced wasn't just a corporate problem, it was a betrayal of everything she'd been taught about leadership and character. There's something else, Sarah said, pulling up another document on her screen. Dad left me a letter before he passed, instructions for how to handle situations exactly like this one. He'd spent decades watching veterans struggle in corporate environments, and he wanted me to be prepared. She printed the document and handed it to me. The letter was written in careful handwriting, the words of a man who'd chosen each phrase deliberately. It outlined specific steps for supporting military personnel, recognizing their unique contributions, and creating environments where their skills could flourish. He knew that discrimination against veterans often happens subtly, through assumptions and stereotypes rather than overt hostility. He wanted me to be vigilant, to actively create opportunities rather than simply avoiding obvious problems. Sarah's voice carried the weight of a promise, made to someone no longer able to witness its fulfillment. Reading her father's words, I felt a connection across generations, from his service in Vietnam to mine in Afghanistan, from his struggles in corporate America to mine at TechFlow Solutions. The challenges were similar, but the responses could be different. Sarah had the power to create change, to build the kind of environment her father had envisioned. Your father would be proud of what you've built here, I said, handing back the letter, and he'd be proud of how you've handled this situation. Sarah's smile was sad but determined. He'd also expect me to do more than just fix this one problem. He'd want me to ensure that every veteran who works here understands their value, their contribution, their place in our mission. The conversation had revealed the personal stakes behind Sarah's professional response. This wasn't just about legal compliance or corporate reputation. It was about honoring the memory of a man who'd served his country and spent decades proving that military experience was an asset, not a liability. As I prepared to leave her office, Sarah made one final statement that would stay with me. Jake saw your military service as a problem to be eliminated. I see it as a strength to be leveraged. We're going to make sure everyone in this company understands the difference. Jake's background check revealed everything Sarah needed to understand his motivations. Born into privilege, the son of a hedge fund manager and a corporate lawyer, he'd attended elite private schools where military service was something that happened to other people's children. His path to TechFlow Solutions had been paved with family connections and networking events, not merit or struggle. When the draft lottery was reinstated briefly during his college years, Jake's family had ensured he received a medical deferment for a minor knee injury that had never affected his recreational soccer career. While young men and women from less privileged backgrounds deployed to combat zones, Jake had completed his MBA at an Ivy League school, writing papers about leadership and team dynamics from the safety of academic theory. He's never been tested, Sarah observed as we reviewed his personnel file in her office. Never faced real adversity, never had to prove himself under pressure. Military veterans represent something he can't understand or control. The pattern of Jake's career advancement revealed a man who'd succeeded through politics rather than performance. He'd moved between companies every 2 to 3 years, always leaving just before his limitations became apparent to his superiors. His technical skills were adequate, but not exceptional. His management style relied on intimidation rather than inspiration. Look at this. Sarah pointed to a section of Jake's previous performance reviews. Every evaluation mentions his difficulty working with employees who have strong technical backgrounds or leadership experience. He consistently rates down anyone who might challenge his authority. Jake's insecurity around veterans made sense. In this context, we represented everything he lacked: proven leadership under pressure, technical expertise earned through practical application, and the respect that came from genuine service. Our presence in his department was a constant reminder of his own limitations. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that Jake's discrimination wasn't just prejudice, it was fear. Fear that his carefully constructed facade of competence would be exposed by employees who'd developed real skills in real situations. Fear that his theoretical knowledge would be revealed as inadequate when compared to our practical experience. He's been systematically eliminating anyone who might threaten his position, I realized. Studying the pattern of transfers and terminations in his department: veterans, experienced developers from other companies, anyone with a strong independent track record. Sarah nodded grimly. He's created an echo chamber of junior developers who depend on him for guidance, who won't question his decisions or challenge his authority. It's the behavior of someone who knows he's out of his depth. Jake's email communications revealed the depth of his insecurity. In messages to other managers, he'd consistently downplayed the achievements of veterans, suggesting their success was due to rigid thinking rather than genuine skill. He'd questioned their ability to adapt to innovative corporate cultures, and warned against promoting them to leadership positions. This is textbook projection, Sarah observed. He's attributing his own limitations to the people who threaten him most. The most damaging evidence came from Jake's communications with external recruiters. He'd actively sought replacements for veteran employees, specifically requesting candidates with no military background. His emails described veterans as difficult to manage and resistant to change, revealing biases that went far beyond professional disagreement. He's been planning a systematic purge, Sarah said, her voice cold with disgust. He wanted to eliminate every veteran from his department and replace them with people he could control. The revelation explained Jake's confidence during my termination. He'd believed he was untouchable, protected by his careful documentation and his ability to manipulate personnel systems. He'd underestimated both the legal protections afforded to veterans and Sarah's commitment to ethical leadership. But there was something else in Jake's behavior that I recognized from my military experience: the desperate overcompensation of someone who'd never proven themselves in meaningful ways. His need to dominate came from a place of profound insecurity, a fear that others would discover he'd never faced real challenges or demonstrated genuine leadership. In the military, we call this peacetime warrior syndrome. I explained to Sarah: people who talk tough but have never been tested, who build their identity around an image rather than experience. They're often the most dangerous because they'll sacrifice others to protect their facade. Sarah's investigation had revealed Jake not as a capable manager with misguided views, but as a fundamentally insecure individual who'd used his position to eliminate perceived threats. His discrimination against veterans wasn't based on rational business concerns. It was a manifestation of his own deep-seated inadequacies. The irony, Sarah noted, is that the qualities he feared in veterans: independence, critical thinking, tested leadership, are exactly what this company needs to continue growing. As we prepared for Jake's termination meeting, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication because his pattern of discrimination had been exposed and would be stopped. Sadness because Jake's insecurities had prevented him from learning from the very people he'd tried to eliminate. He could have been a better manager if he'd embraced what veterans brought to the team, I reflected. Instead, he chose fear over growth, control over collaboration, Sarah's expression was resolute as she gathered the evidence we'd compiled. Some people rise to challenges, others try to eliminate them. Jake's about to learn the consequences of choosing the wrong approach. Sarah's call to the company's legal counsel revealed the severity of TechFlow Solutions' exposure. The Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act wasn't just a guideline, it was federal law with serious penalties for violations. As we sat in the conference room with General Counsel Patricia Williams, the scope of potential consequences became clear. USERRA protects service members from discrimination based on their military service, both past and ongoing, Patricia explained, spreading legal documents across the table. Jake's actions constitute multiple violations that could result in federal investigation, substantial financial penalties, and class action lawsuits. The law was comprehensive in its protections. Employers couldn't discriminate against employees based on their military obligations, couldn't retaliate against those who exercised their rights under use, and were required to provide reasonable accommodations for military service commitments. Jake had violated all three provisions systematically. The documentation you've uncovered shows clear intent to discriminate, Patricia continued, reviewing Jake's email communications. His statements about weekend warriors and unreliable military personnel establish a pattern that any federal investigator would recognize immediately. Sarah's face was grim as she absorbed the legal implications. What kind of exposure are we looking at? Individual damages for each affected employee, including back pay, front pay, and compensatory damages. Liquidated damages equal to the amount of back pay if we can't prove the violations weren't willful, which this documentation makes impossible. Patricia paused, calculating. We're potentially looking at millions in direct costs, plus legal fees and reputational damage. The most serious concern was the possibility of a Department of Labor investigation. USERRA violations were handled by the Veterans Employment and Training Service, which had broad authority to investigate employers and enforce compliance. A federal investigation would bring unwanted scrutiny to every aspect of TechFlow's employment practices. There's also the question of criminal liability, Patricia added gravely. Willful violations of USERRA can result in criminal prosecution. Jake's systematic discrimination and falsification of performance records could constitute federal crimes. I listened to this discussion with mixed feelings. Part of me was vindicated to learn that Jake's actions weren't just unethical, were illegal. But I also understood that the company I'd worked for and believed in was now facing consequences for one manager's prejudices. What about the other veterans Jake targeted? I asked. David Chen, Maria Santos, Tommy Wadu, they have grounds for action, Patricia nodded. Each of them has clear claims under USERRA. David's negative reviews correlating with his reserve duty. Maria's performance improvement plan following VA appointments. Tommy's denied promotions despite meeting qualification. Of these constitute actionable discrimination. The legal strategy session revealed how carefully Jake had documented his discrimination while believing he was protecting himself. His performance reviews and disciplinary actions created a paper trail that actually proved systematic bias, rather than legitimate business concerns. Jake's attempt to create false documentation has backfired spectacularly, Patricia observed. By putting his discriminatory reasoning in writing, he's created evidence that any jury would understand clearly. Sarah was taking notes throughout the discussion, her business mind clearly calculating not just legal costs but operational impacts. How do we handle this going forward? What's our best strategy for minimizing damage? Complete transparency and immediate corrective action, Patricia replied. We need to restore all affected veterans to their proper positions, provide back pay for any losses, and implement comprehensive anti-discrimination policies. Most importantly, we need to demonstrate that Jake's actions were contrary to company values and policies. The discussion turned to specific remedies for each affected veteran. David Chen would be restored to his previous performance rating and considered for the promotion he'd been denied. Maria Santos would be removed from her performance improvement plan and provided with additional support for her VA-related needs. Tommy Wu would be immediately considered for the leadership position he'd been systematically excluded from. We also need to conduct a company-wide review of personnel decisions involving veterans, Patricia continued. We need to ensure there are no other patterns of discrimination and that all veterans understand their rights under USERRA. Sarah's commitment to comprehensive reform was clear. I want mandatory training for all managers on USERRA compliance. I want clear policies that protect military service members, and I want a reporting system that prevents this from happening again. The legal implications extended beyond TechFlow Solutions to the broader tech industry. Companies across Silicon Valley were struggling with diversity and inclusion, often focusing on gender and racial equity while overlooking veterans' rights. Jake's violations could serve as a wake-up call for the entire sector. This case could set important precedents, Patricia noted. If we handle it correctly, it could demonstrate how companies should respond to USERRA violations. If we handle it poorly, it could result in expanded federal oversight for the entire industry. As our meeting concluded, I realized that Jake's discrimination had created an opportunity for positive change that extended far beyond my individual situation. His violations had forced TechFlow Solutions to confront systemic issues and implement reforms that would benefit all veterans. The irony, Sarah observed, is that Jake's attempt to weaken our company by eliminating veterans has actually strengthened our commitment to diversity and inclusion. Patricia gathered her documents with a final warning. We need to move quickly and decisively. Every day we delay implementing corrective measures increases our exposure and demonstrates a lack of commitment to compliance. The legal framework was clear. TechFlow Solutions had been violated by one manager's prejudices, but the company's response would determine whether this became a learning opportunity or a federal case study in corporate discrimination. The photograph in my wallet had traveled with me through 3 deployments and 2 years of corporate life. Creased and faded, it showed my squad from Afghanistan, 9 faces that represented brotherhood forged in shared hardship and mutual dependence. As I sat in TechFlow's break room, processing the day's revelations, I found myself studying those faces and remembering the lessons they'd taught me about strength under pressure. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez had been our squad leader during that final deployment, a career soldier who'd taught me that true leadership meant taking care of your people first and yourself last. When the IED had shattered my leg and left me struggling to maintain consciousness, Rodriguez had been the one coordinating our evacuation while keeping the squad focused and functional. His calm voice had cut through the chaos, providing the stability we needed to complete our mission despite the trauma. Real strength isn't about never getting knocked down, he'd told me during my recovery. It's about how you handle yourself when everything goes to hell. Those words had sustained me through months of physical therapy, through the challenge of adapting to civilian life, and now through the injustice of Jake's discrimination. The same composure that had served me in combat was serving me in this corporate battlefield. Not the hot anger of immediate reaction, but the cold determination of someone who'd learned to think strategically under pressure. My initial response to Jake's termination had been instinctive: maintain discipline, accept the situation, adapt, and overcome. But as the scope of his discrimination became clear, I realized that my individual response was part of a larger responsibility. Other veterans were counting on me to handle this situation with the same integrity I'd brought to military service. David Chen had stopped by my desk earlier, his expression carrying the weight of someone who'd been fighting this battle alone. I thought I was imagining things, he'd admitted quietly. The subtle comments, the impossible standards, the way he dismissed everything I contributed. I started questioning whether I belonged here. That conversation had crystallized something important for me. Jake's discrimination hadn't just affected individual careers. It had undermined the confidence and self-worth of people who'd proven themselves in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. Veterans who'd led troops in combat were doubting their ability to succeed in corporate environments, because one insecure manager had systematically gaslighted them. We don't leave people behind, I'd told David, echoing a principle that had guided every military unit I'd served with. That applies here too. Maria Santos had approached me later with similar concerns. Her struggles with Jake's persecution of her VA appointments had created anxiety around seeking the medical care she'd earned through her service. She'd been scheduling appointments around work demands rather than her health needs, sacrificing her well-being to avoid Jake's retaliation. You shouldn't have to choose between taking care of yourself and keeping your job, I'd told her. That's not who we are as a company, and it's not who we are as people. Tommy Wu's situation had been perhaps the most frustrating. His leadership abilities were obvious to anyone who'd worked with him, but Jake had systematically excluded him from advancement opportunities while promoting less qualified employees. Tommy had begun to internalize Jake's message that his military background made him unsuitable for leadership roles. You led Marines in combat, I'd reminded him. Managing software developers should be easy by comparison. As I reflected on these conversations, I realized that my response to discrimination couldn't be purely individual. The quiet strength that military service had taught me, the ability to remain calm under pressure, to think strategically rather than emotionally, to focus on mission accomplishment rather than personal vindication, had to be applied to protecting and supporting other veterans. Sarah had asked me to consider taking a leadership role in addressing these issues company-wide. The prospect was both challenging and meaningful, an opportunity to transform a painful experience into positive change. For others, it would mean accepting responsibility for creating the kind of inclusive environment that honored military service while supporting all employees. The decision required the same kind of strategic thinking I'd used in Afghanistan. What were the objectives? Eliminate discrimination, support affected veterans, prevent future violations, and create lasting cultural change. What resources were available? Legal protections, executive support, documented evidence, and a community of veterans ready to support each other. What were the potential obstacles? Institutional inertia, subtle retaliation, and the challenge of changing deeply held biases. Most importantly, what would success look like? Veterans feeling valued and supported, their unique skills leveraged effectively, their service respected. rather than tolerated, a company culture that recognized military experience as an asset rather than a liability. Policies and practices that prevented discrimination while promoting inclusion. The military had taught me that leadership wasn't about position or authority, it was about taking responsibility for outcomes and caring for the people under your influence. In this corporate context, that meant ensuring that no veteran would face the kind of systematic discrimination I'd experienced, and that every service member would have the opportunity to contribute their skills effectively. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, I felt the same sense of purpose that had sustained me through military service. This wasn't just about my career or my vindication. It was about creating change that would benefit every veteran who followed. The same commitment that had driven me to serve my country could now be applied to serving my fellow veterans in a different context. The photograph of my squad reminded me that strength came not from individual toughness, but from collective commitment to shared values. We'd protected each other in Afghanistan, and now I had the opportunity to extend that protection to veterans facing different battles in corporate America. The mission was clear. The resources were available, and the leadership support was genuine. All that remained was execution, applying the same discipline, integrity, and determination that had defined my military service to the challenge of creating lasting change in corporate culture. Sarah's father's Bronze Star sat in a place of honor on her bookshelf, nestled between business awards and family photographs. As she prepared for the most important decision of her tenure as CEO, she found herself drawing strength from the small piece of metal that represented everything she'd been taught about service and sacrifice. The evidence against Jake was overwhelming, but Sarah's response would define TechFlow Solutions for years to come. This wasn't just about correcting one manager's discrimination, it was about establishing the company's values in concrete, measurable ways. Her father's influence guided her thinking as she crafted a comprehensive response that would honor his memory while protecting every veteran in her employ. "We're going to do this right," she announced to the emergency leadership meeting she'd called. "Not just legally right, but morally right. We're going to demonstrate that this company values military service and will protect those who've served." The assembled department heads listened as Sarah outlined her decision. Jake would be terminated immediately, with cause, forfeiting any severance or benefits beyond what legally required. His systematic discrimination had violated federal law, company policy, and basic human decency. There would be no second chances, no performance improvement plans, no gradual transition. "But terminating Jake is just the beginning," Sarah continued. "We need systemic changes that ensure this never happens again." Her vision was comprehensive and immediate. Every veteran affected by Jake's discrimination would be restored to their proper status, with back pay, corrected performance reviews, and consideration for opportunities they'd been denied. The company would establish a Veterans Advisory Committee, with real authority to review policies and practices. Mandatory training on USERRA compliance would be implemented for all managers within 30 days. Most significantly, Sarah announced the creation of a new executive position, Director of Veterans Affairs, with responsibility for ensuring the company's commitment to military service members was meaningful rather than symbolic. The position would report directly to her, carrying the authority necessary to implement real change. "I want Marcus Rivera to fill this role," she stated, her voice carrying the certainty of command. "He has the credibility, the experience, and the integrity necessary to lead this transformation." The room buzzed with quiet discussion as department heads absorbed the implications. This wasn't a token gesture or a temporary response to a crisis, it was a fundamental shift in how TechFlow Solutions would approach diversity and inclusion. Veterans would have representation at the highest levels of the conversation. Sarah's decision reflected her father's influence in ways both subtle and profound. Captain Chen had taught her that organizations succeeded when they leveraged the full potential of their people, regardless of background or experience. He'd shown her that diversity wasn't just about fairness, it was about competitive advantage, bringing different perspectives and skills to complex challenges. "My father believed that veterans bring unique value to civilian organizations," Sarah explained to the group. "Proven leadership under pressure, the ability to work effectively in diverse teams, commitment to mission accomplishment, and a perspective shaped by service to something larger than themselves." The financial investment in her decision was substantial: back pay, legal costs, training programs, and the creation of new positions. But Sarah understood that the cost of discrimination was far higher. Federal investigations, class action lawsuits, reputational damage, and the loss of talented employees would have devastated the company far more than the cost of doing the right thing. Her announcement to the broader company would be equally decisive. An all-hands meeting was scheduled for the following morning, where Sarah would personally explain Jake's termination, the company's commitment to veterans, and the new policies being implemented. Transparency would be total, no corporate spin, no careful language designed to minimize responsibility. "We made a mistake by allowing this discrimination to continue," she would tell the assembled employees. "We're going to fix that mistake completely and permanently." The message would extend beyond TechFlow Solutions to the broader tech industry. Silicon Valley companies struggled with diversity initiatives, often focusing on gender and racial equity. While overlooking veterans' issues, Sarah's comprehensive response would demonstrate how seriously companies should take Sarah, compliance, and military inclusion, but the decision was also deeply personal. Sarah's father had faced similar discrimination after Vietnam, struggling to find employers who valued his service rather than questioning it. He'd built his own company partly to create the kind of environment he'd never found as an employee. Now Sarah had the opportunity to create that environment on a larger scale. "This is about honoring the people who've served our country," she reflected privately. "It's about creating the kind of workplace my father would have wanted to be part of." The immediate implementation of her decision would be challenging. Changing corporate culture required more than policy. Statements required consistent action, ongoing commitment, and the courage to confront bias wherever it appeared. But Sarah had the resources, the authority, and the personal motivation necessary to see it through. As she prepared for the difficult conversations ahead, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility her father had carried throughout his career. Leading meant making hard decisions, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, and standing up for principles even when it was costly or complicated. Jake's discrimination had created a crisis, but Sarah's response would transform it into an opportunity, a chance to build something better, something worthy of the sacrifice and service that veterans had given to their country. Her father's influence would guide every aspect of that transformation, ensuring that TechFlow Solutions became the kind of company that honored military service rather than merely tolerating it. The bronze star on her bookshelf caught the afternoon light, a reminder that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost or complexity involved. Jake's confidence evaporated the moment Sarah handed him his termination notice. The document was precise and devastating, listing each violation of federal law, company policy, and basic professional standards. His carefully constructed justifications crumbled under the weight of documented evidence, emails, performance reviews, and witness statements that revealed the systematic nature of his discrimination. "This is a mistake," Jake stammered, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and desperate calculation. "Marcus was unreliable, unavailable when the team needed him. I was protecting company interests." Sarah's expression remained coldly professional as she spread his own communications across the conference table. "These emails show you describing veterans as weekend warriors and military baggage. You actively sought to replace decorated service members with what you called more manageable employees. Which company interest does that protect?" The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Jake's attempt to maintain his facade of legitimate business concerns collapsed as Sarah methodically destroyed each of his justifications. His pattern of discrimination wasn't a series of isolated decisions, it was a calculated campaign to eliminate veterans from his department. "You've exposed this company to federal investigation, class action lawsuits, and millions in damages," Sarah continued, her voice carrying the ice-cold fury of a leader betrayed by a subordinate. "You've violated the trust placed in you as a manager and the values that define this organization." Jake's desperation became palpable as he realized the scope of his exposure. "I was following performance metrics, enforcing attendance policies. If there were legal issues, HR should have stopped." Sarah's command cut through his excuses with military precision. "You documented your discriminatory intent in writing. You consulted external counsel about eliminating veterans. You falsified performance reviews to justify illegal actions. There is no plausible explanation that doesn't involve conscious discrimination." The termination meeting had been carefully choreographed to prevent any possibility of retaliation or further damage. HR representatives documented every statement. Legal counsel was present to ensure compliance with termination procedures, and security personnel waited outside to escort Jake from the building. "Your access to company systems has been revoked," Sarah announced. "Your corporate credit cards have been canceled. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings under supervision." Jake's attempt to salvage his reputation revealed the depths of his character flaws. Rather than accepting responsibility, he shifted blame to the veterans he'd targeted, suggesting they'd manipulated the situation to avoid accountability for poor performance. His inability to recognize the legitimacy of their complaints demonstrated the same prejudices that had driven his discriminatory actions. "Marcus Rivera earned a Purple Heart, saving his squad from an IED," Sarah stated flatly. "David Chen served 2 tours in the Navy and has consistently exceeded performance targets. Maria Santos is an Air Force veteran with exemplary technical skills. Your assessment of these employees reveals more about your biases than their capabilities." The collected evidence painted a picture of systematic prejudice disguised as professional judgment. Jake had created false narratives about veteran employees, documented fictional performance issues, and manipulated review processes to justify predetermined conclusions. His actions weren't the result of poor judgment, they were calculated attempts to eliminate employees he couldn't control or understand. "I built my career on results," Jake protested weakly. "I've always focused on what's best for the company. Your career was built on privilege and networking. Sarah replied. Your results came from inheriting strong teams and taking credit for their work. When faced with employees who actually demonstrated leadership and competence, you tried to eliminate them rather than learn from them. The security escort that followed was swift and professional. Jake's personal belongings fit into a single cardboard box: a few photographs, some books, and the diploma from his MBA program that had opened doors his character couldn't justify. His desk drawers contained nothing of substance, no evidence of meaningful contribution or lasting impact. As security led him through the office, Jake's former subordinates watched with expressions ranging from relief to vindication. The veterans he'd targeted maintained their professional composure, but their colleagues showed less restraint. Whispered conversations followed his exit. Speculation about his actions and relief that his toxic influence was finally being removed. This is a witch hunt, Jake announced loudly as he reached the elevator, making one final attempt to control the narrative. You'll regret this decision when you see how these people really perform without protection. Sarah's response was delivered in a voice that carried throughout the office floor. The only thing we regret is allowing your discrimination to continue as long as it did. Your termination protects every employee from the hostile work environment you created. The elevator doors closed on Jake's corporate career with the finality of judgment rendered. His 17 months of systematic discrimination had ended with a termination for cause that would follow him to every future employment opportunity. The references he'd counted on were gone. The network he'd cultivated was contaminated by his actions, and the carefully constructed image he'd maintained was shattered beyond repair. In the silence that followed his departure, the office seemed to exhale collectively. The toxic presence that had infected team dynamics was gone, replaced by the possibility of genuine collaboration and mutual respect. Veterans could focus on their work rather than defending their service, and all employees could trust that their contributions would be evaluated fairly. Jake's downfall had been swift and decisive, but it was also complete. The man who'd tried to eliminate veterans from his department had eliminated himself through his own prejudices and poor judgment. His termination served as both justice for his victims and warning to anyone else who might consider similar discrimination. The cardboard box containing his belongings would be his only lasting legacy at TechFlow Solutions, a reminder that talent and character mattered more than privilege and networking, and that discrimination would be met with the full consequences it deserved. The all-hands meeting that followed Jake's termination was unlike anything TechFlow Solutions had experienced. In its corporate history, Sarah stood before nearly 1,000 employees, her presentation materials displaying statistics that revealed the scope of discrimination that had infected their workplace. The company she'd built on principles of innovation and inclusion had been corrupted by systematic bias, and she was determined to confront that failure directly. Yesterday, we terminated a manager for willful discrimination against veterans, Sarah announced, her voice carrying throughout the packed auditorium. Jake Morrison violated federal law, company policy, and basic human decency. His actions do not represent our values, but our response will define who we are as an organization. The presentation that followed was comprehensive and unflinching. Charts showed the career trajectories of veteran employees under Jake's supervision compared to their peers. Performance ratings revealed patterns of bias that couldn't be explained by any legitimate business criteria. The evidence was overwhelming, and undeniable discrimination had been systematic, documented, and ongoing. We failed these employees, Sarah continued. We failed to recognize warning signs, to investigate concerning patterns, to protect people who had already sacrificed for their country. That failure ends today. The Veterans Initiative she announced was more than policy reform, it was cultural transformation. Every veteran who'd been affected by discrimination would receive immediate remediation, corrected performance reviews, back pay for missed opportunities, and consideration for positions they'd been denied. The company would establish mentorship programs pairing veterans with senior executives, ensuring their unique skills were recognized and developed. Most significantly, Sarah announced my appointment as Director of Veterans Affairs, a new executive position with broad authority to address military-related employment issues. The role would include policy development, training coordination, recruitment initiatives, and direct access to executive leadership for any veteran facing workplace challenges. Marcus Rivera will lead this transformation, Sarah explained. His service record, professional competence, and personal integrity make him the ideal person to ensure our commitment to veterans is meaningful rather than symbolic. The announcement triggered applause that started with veteran employees and spread throughout the auditorium. Colleagues who'd watched Jake's discrimination with growing concern were relieved to see decisive action. The message was clear to Solutions would be a place where military service was valued, not tolerated. The policy changes were immediate and comprehensive. All managers would complete mandatory USERA training within 30 days, with annual refreshers and testing to ensure compliance. HR procedures would be revised to include veteran-specific protections and accommodation processes. Recruitment efforts would actively target military talent, with partnerships established at veteran job fairs and military transition programs. We're not just fixing past problems, Sarah emphasized. We're building systems that prevent discrimination and actively support military service members. The Veterans Advisory Committee would include representatives from every department, ensuring military perspectives were integrated into decision-making at all levels. The committee would review policies, evaluate workplace climate, and recommend improvements to support veteran employees effectively. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah addressed the cultural aspects of the transformation. Military service represents values we should all embrace: commitment to mission, care for teammates, integrity under pressure, and service to something larger than ourselves. Veterans don't need our charity, they bring skills and perspectives that make us stronger. The financial investment in the initiative was substantial but strategic. Legal compliance costs were dwarfed by the value of retaining talented veterans and attracting military talent from other companies. The initiative would position TechFlow Solutions as the premier destination for veterans transitioning to corporate careers. Employee response was overwhelmingly positive, particularly from colleagues who'd witnessed Jake's discrimination firsthand. Many expressed relief that the toxic environment was being addressed, that veterans could finally focus on their work rather than defending their service. "I've been watching this happen for months," admitted Jennifer Walsh from the marketing department. "Seeing good people treated unfairly because of their military background was demoralizing for everyone." The ripple effects extended beyond immediate policy changes. Department heads began reviewing their own practices, looking for subtle biases or systemic barriers that might affect veteran employees. The message was clear: discrimination would not be tolerated at any level, in any form. Training programs were expanded beyond USERA compliance to include broader diversity and inclusion topics. Military service was contextualized as one aspect of the diverse backgrounds that strengthened teams and improved outcomes. Veterans were positioned not as a protected class, requiring accommodation, but as valuable contributors, bringing unique capabilities. The transformation also included communication strategies that highlighted veteran contributions to company success. Newsletter articles featured veteran employees discussing their roles and achievements. Company websites were updated to showcase military talent and express explicit support for continued service obligations. "We want every veteran to know they belong here," Sarah concluded her presentation. "We want every employee to understand the value that military experience brings to our mission, and we want every stakeholder to see that TechFlow Solutions honors the service and sacrifice of our military community." The standing ovation that followed wasn't just appreciation for leadership, it was collective commitment to the values Sarah had articulated. The company that had allowed discrimination to fester was transforming itself into an organization that actively supported military service members. As employees filed out of the auditorium, conversations buzzed with energy and purpose. The initiative wasn't just about compliance or public relations. It was about creating the kind of workplace where everyone could contribute their best work, regardless of background or experience. The changes would take time to implement fully, but the direction was set. TechFlow Solutions would become a model for how corporations could support veterans while strengthening their own capabilities. Jake's discrimination had created a crisis, but Sarah's response was transforming it into an opportunity for lasting positive change. The business cards arrived on a Tuesday morning, their crisp white surfaces bearing my new title in embossed lettering: Marcus Rivera, Director of Veterans Affairs. Holding them felt surreal. Less than a week earlier, I'd been packing my belongings after being fired for playing Army, and now I held a position that represented hope for every veteran-facing workplace. Discrimination. My new office was located on the executive floor, a symbolic placement that reinforced the importance Sarah placed on veteran issues. The space was larger than anything I'd occupied in my software development career, with windows overlooking the corporate campus where nearly 50 veterans worked across various departments. The weight of responsibility was immediate and profound. This wasn't just a promotion, it was a mission that could impact hundreds of lives, both current employees and future veterans seeking corporate careers. The initiative I was tasked with leading would either become a meaningful transformation or an expensive failure, depending on my ability to translate military leadership principles into corporate culture change. My first priority was connecting with every veteran currently employed at TechFlow Solutions. Over the next week, I scheduled individual meetings with each of them, listening to their experiences, understanding their challenges, and learning about their aspirations. The conversations revealed patterns that went far beyond Jake's department. David Chun's experience in the Navy had prepared him for complex logistics challenges, but his suggestions for improving supply chain management had been dismissed as too military by previous supervisors. Maria Santos possessed cybersecurity expertise gained through Air Force intelligence work, but had been pigeonholed into routine maintenance tasks that didn't utilize her specialized skills. Tommy Wu's leadership experience from Marine Corps infantry operations was being wasted in individual contributor roles while less qualified employees advanced to management positions. "We're not using our talent effectively," I reported to Sarah during our first strategic planning meeting. "These aren't accommodation issues, they're missed opportunities. We have veterans with specialized skills who could be driving innovation instead of fighting for basic respect. The strategic plan one developed focused on integration rather than segregation. Rather than creating veteran-only programs that might isolate military talent, I proposed initiatives that leveraged veteran skills while benefiting all employees. Leadership development programs would pair veteran mentors with emerging leaders. Project management training would incorporate military planning methodologies. Crisis response protocols would draw on veteran expertise in handling high-pressure situations. The goal isn't special treatment, I explained to the executive team. It's optimal utilization of the talent we already have. The Veterans Advisory Committee became a powerful force for change, meeting monthly to review policies and recommend improvements. We established clear escalation procedures for discrimination complaints, created mentorship networks, connecting veterans across departments, and developed recruitment partnerships with military transition programs. But the most meaningful aspect of my new role was the opportunity to change individual lives. When Staff Sergeant Jennifer Torres left the Army after 8 years of exemplary service, she struggled to translate her experience into civilian terms that corporate recruiters could understand. Our military talent acquisition program helped her present her logistics expertise in business language, resulting in a senior supply chain position that utilized her skills effectively. When Captain Michael Rodriguez completed his Marine Corps commitment, he assumed his infantry background, had no civilian applications. Our leadership development initiative paired him with a senior executive who recognized that leading Marines in combat operations was excellent preparation for managing high-performing teams in competitive markets. You're not just finding jobs. For veterans, Sarah observed during one of our quarterly reviews, you're helping the company discover capabilities we didn't know we had. The transformation extended beyond individual success stories to systemic culture change. Department heads began specifically recruiting veteran talent for leadership positions. Project teams started incorporating military planning methodologies. Company communications highlighted veteran contributions to major achievements. Most importantly, the initiative was creating ripple effects throughout the tech industry. Other companies began reaching out, asking for consultation on their own veteran integration programs. Industry conferences invited me to speak about best practices for military talent utilization. TechFlow Solutions was becoming known as the premier destination for veterans. Transitioning to corporate careers. The personal satisfaction of the role went beyond professional achievement. Every success story, every barrier removed, every veteran who found their place in our corporate mission was a validation of the values that had defined my military service, the same commitment to leave no one behind that had guided my squad. Leadership in Afghanistan was now protecting and advancing veterans facing different challenges in corporate America. This is more than a job, I reflected during a conversation with my former squad leader, Rodriguez, who had visited to see the program in action. It's a continuation of service, just in a different uniform. The business cards in my wallet represented more than a title. They represented the possibility that corporate America could become a place where military service was valued, where veteran skills were leveraged effectively, and where discrimination was replaced by opportunity. The transformation wasn't complete, but the foundation was solid and the direction was clear. My purpose had evolved from individual survival to collective advancement, from defending my own career to creating pathways for others. The same leadership principles that had sustained me through combat operations were now driving organizational change that would benefit veterans for years to come. The thank you letters began arriving within weeks of the Veterans Initiative launch. Handwritten notes from military families whose lives had been touched by the changes at TechFlow Solutions. Each envelope contained a story of transformation: a spouse who'd found meaningful work after years of unemployment, a recent veteran who'd discovered that corporate America could value their service, a National Guard member who no longer had to choose between military obligations and career advancement. The letter that moved me most came from Staff Sergeant Maria Elena Vasquez, a recently medically retired soldier who'd been struggling to find employment that accommodated her disabilities. Our modified recruitment process had connected her with a remote software testing position that leveraged her attention to detail while allowing the flexibility she needed for medical appointments. For the first time since leaving the Army, I feel like someone sees my potential instead of my limitations, she wrote. Your program didn't just give me a job, it gave me back my sense of purpose. Similar stories emerged from across the company. David Chen had been promoted to senior logistics analyst, where his Navy experience with complex supply chains was finally being utilized effectively. His innovative approaches to vendor management had saved the company significant costs, while improving delivery timelines. The same military perspective that Jake had dismissed as rigid thinking was now recognized as strategic advantage. Maria Santos had transitioned from routine maintenance tasks to lead cybersecurity analyst, where her Air Force intelligence background proved invaluable. Her development of new threat detection protocols had prevented 2 potential security breaches, earning recognition from both internal leadership and external industry groups. Tommy Wu's promotion to team lead had transformed not just his career trajectory but team performance metrics. His Marine Corps leadership experience translated perfectly to managing high-pressure software development cycles. Team productivity increased 23% under his guidance, while employee satisfaction scores reached company highs. "These aren't charity cases," Sarah observed during one of our monthly reviews. "These are high-performing employees whose talents were being wasted by discriminatory management." The healing process extended beyond individual career advancement to deeper cultural transformation. Veterans who had been questioning their place in corporate America began to see their military experience as an asset rather than a liability. The imposter syndrome that many experienced, the feeling that their skills didn't translate to business environments, was being replaced by confidence and belonging. The monthly veterans coffee sessions had become informal support networks, where military personnel could share experiences, discuss challenges, and celebrate successes. These gatherings served multiple purposes: peer mentoring, professional development, and community building that strengthened both individual resilience and organizational culture. The Crystal Award arrived on a Monday morning, its engraved surface reflecting the morning sunlight that streamed through my office windows. Corporate Excellence in Veterans Employment. National Association of Veteran Business Leaders represented. Recognition that extended far beyond TechFlow Solutions to the broader transformation we'd sparked across the technology industry. The award ceremony in Washington, D.C., had been attended by representatives from dozens of companies implementing similar initiatives. CEOs and HR directors approached me throughout the evening, seeking guidance on developing their own veteran integration programs. The model we'd created was being replicated across Silicon Valley and beyond. "You've changed the conversation," observed General Patricia Morrison, the event's keynote speaker and former Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs. "Companies are no longer asking whether they should support veterans, they're asking how to do it effectively." The industry transformation was measurable and significant. A Stanford Business School study tracking veteran employment in tech companies showed a 47% increase in military talent recruitment over the 18 months following our initiative's launch. More importantly, retention rates for veteran employees had improved dramatically as companies adopted policies that valued military experience. The conference presentations I'd been invited to deliver had evolved from sharing our specific practices to addressing systemic changes needed across corporate America. The discrimination that Jake had embodied wasn't unique to TechFlow Solutions. It reflected broader cultural biases that pervaded many industries. "We're not just fixing individual company problems," I explained to a gathering of Fortune 500 HR executives. "We're challenging assumptions about what leadership looks like, what skills matter, and how military experience translates to business success." The research data supporting our approach was compelling. Companies with comprehensive veteran integration programs showed higher rates of innovation, better crisis management capabilities, and stronger team cohesion. The diversity of thought that veterans brought to problem solving was measurably improving business outcomes. Harvard Business Review featured our initiative as their cover story, titled "The Military Advantage: How Veteran Talent Drives Innovation." The article detailed specific examples of how military experience contributed to breakthrough solutions. From cybersecurity protocols developed by intelligence veterans to logistics optimization systems created by former supply officers, but the most meaningful impact was happening at the individual level across hundreds of companies. Veterans who had been struggling with workplace discrimination were finding environments where their service was valued. Military spouses were accessing career opportunities that accommodated deployment schedules. Recent veterans were discovering that their skills translated effectively to corporate challenges. The ripple effects extended to military families and communities. When veterans succeeded in corporate environments, their children saw military service as a pathway to diverse career opportunities rather than a limitation. Military bases began partnering with companies to provide transition training that prepared service members for corporate success. "You've created a multiplier effect," noted Dr. Sarah Kim from the Veterans Administration during a policy review. "Meeting each successful veteran in corporate leadership becomes a champion for others, creating pathways that multiply over time." The legislative impact was equally significant. Congressional hearings on veteran employment featured our initiative as evidence that private sector solutions could complement government programs. USERRA enforcement was being strengthened based on lessons learned from discrimination cases. Like Jake's, the international attention was unexpected but gratifying. Companies in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia were adapting our model to support their own veteran populations. The principles of leveraging military experience translated across different cultural contexts and business environments. Military service develops similar capabilities regardless of nationality, I observed during a NATO business conference in Brussels. The challenge is helping civilian organizations recognize and utilize those capabilities effectively. The academic Research programs that emerged from our work were establishing veteran employment as a legitimate field of study. Business schools were developing case studies, industrial psychology departments were researching military-to-civilian transition, and organizational behavior experts were documenting the impact of veteran integration on team performance. Awards and recognition were gratifying. But the real measure of success was the changed lives and strengthened organizations we were creating. Veterans were finding their place in corporate America, companies were discovering untapped talent, and entire industries were benefiting from military perspectives on leadership and problem-solving. This started with one person's discrimination, Sarah reflected during our quarterly board presentation, but the response has created systematic change that will benefit veterans for generations. The transformation was becoming self-sustaining. Companies competing for veteran talent were improving their programs independently. Professional organizations were establishing veteran-focused networking groups. Industry conferences were featuring military-to-civilian transition as standard programming. The model we'd created at TechFlow Solutions was evolving beyond our specific initiatives to become industry-standard practice. The discrimination that had threatened my career had sparked changes that would protect and advance thousands of veterans in corporate environments. The Crystal Award on my desk represented more than recognition. It symbolized the power of standing up for principles, the importance of institutional leadership in driving change, and the potential for individual adversity to become collective advancement. Your experience taught us that discrimination isn't just harmful to individuals, Sarah had said during the awards presentation. It's a waste of organizational potential that successful companies can't afford. The broader impact was still expanding, creating waves of change that reached far beyond the original crisis that had sparked our initiative. Jake's prejudices had unintentionally catalyzed a transformation that was making corporate America more inclusive, more effective, and more appreciative of military service and sacrifice. The new commendation arrived in a formal military envelope, its contents recognizing my contributions to National Guard readiness and veteran transition programs. The citation described innovative training methodologies I'd developed that bridged military and civilian leadership principles, helping prepare soldiers for both deployment and eventual corporate careers. Standing in my home office, wearing my dress uniform for the first time in months, I felt the integration of my two identities in ways I'd never experienced before. The corporate executive and the National Guard sergeant were no longer competing aspects of my life. They were complementary, expressions of the same commitment to service and leadership. The monthly drill weekends had taken on new meaning since my promotion to Director of Veterans Affairs. My civilian experience was enhancing my military leadership, while my continued service was informing my corporate initiatives. The cross was making me more effective in both roles. "You found your sweet spot," observed Command Sergeant Major Rodriguez during our latest leadership assessment. "You're using corporate skills to improve military training while applying military principles to business challenges." The training programs I'd developed for our National Guard unit incorporated lessons learned from managing corporate teams under pressure. Communication protocols I'd refined in business settings were improving coordination during field exercises. Leadership development frameworks from executive training were preparing young soldiers for advancement opportunities. But perhaps most importantly, my continued military service was validating the message I'd been promoting in corporate environments. National Guard obligations enhanced rather than hindered professional capabilities. My success in both arenas was living proof that military and civilian careers could be mutually reinforcing. The soldiers I worked with were benefiting from corporate perspectives on project management, strategic planning, and team dynamics. Many were applying these skills in their civilian jobs, finding that their military training was more relevant to business success than they'd initially understood. "You're showing us that we don't have to choose between military service and corporate careers," Specialist Jennifer Martinez told me after a particularly effective training exercise. "You're proving that both can make us stronger." The personal growth had been profound and multifaceted. The discrimination I'd experienced had forced me to articulate the value of military service in ways I'd never needed to before. Defending my military identity in corporate settings had deepened my understanding of what that service meant and why it mattered. The leadership challenges of managing organizational change at TechFlow Solutions had developed skills that translated directly to military contexts. Building consensus among diverse stakeholders, managing resistance to change, and communicating vision effectively were competencies that served both environments. The speaking engagements and consulting opportunities that had emerged from our initiative's success were creating platforms to influence veteran employment practices across multiple industries. Each presentation was an opportunity to change minds, challenge assumptions, and create pathways for other veterans. "You've become a bridge," Sarah observed during one of our strategic planning sessions. "You're helping civilian leaders understand military culture while helping veterans navigate corporate environments." The integration was deeply personal as well as professional. My family had watched me struggle with workplace discrimination, questioning whether I belonged in corporate America. Now they saw me thriving in leadership roles that honored both my military service and civilian aspirations. The monthly veterans coffee sessions at TechFlow had evolved into informal mentoring networks where I could share lessons learned from both military leadership and corporate management. The conversations were helping other veterans develop confidence in their ability to succeed in business environments. "Your story gives us hope," admitted Captain David Park, a recent Army veteran struggling with his transition to civilian employment. "If you can go from being fired for military service to leading corporate change, maybe there's a path for the rest of us too." The reflection on my journey revealed patterns that went beyond individual career progression. The discrimination that had threatened to derail my civilian trajectory had actually strengthened my commitment to both military service and corporate leadership. The crisis had clarified my values and crystallized my sense of purpose. The military principles that had sustained me through combat deployments, mission focus, team loyalty, adaptability under pressure, were the same qualities that had enabled me to navigate corporate discrimination and lead organizational transformation. The continuity was reassuring and empowering. The continued National Guard service was no longer a burden to be managed alongside corporate responsibilities. It was an integral part of my professional identity that enhanced both my military effectiveness and civilian impact. The integration had taken years to achieve, but the result was sustainable and fulfilling. "You've figured out something that many veterans struggle with," observed Colonel Martinez during a recent leadership conference. "You've created a unified identity that honors both your military service and civilian aspirations, without compromising either." The commendation in my hands represented recognition not just for specific achievements, but for demonstrating that military and civilian careers could be mutually reinforcing rather than competing demands. The model I was living was creating possibilities for other veterans facing similar identity challenges. The personal growth had prepared me for even greater challenges and opportunities ahead. The foundation was solid, the direction was clear, and the integration of military and civilian identities was enabling leadership in both contexts that wouldn't have been possible in either alone. The memorial wall's bronze plaques gleamed in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through TechFlow Solutions' main lobby, each nameplate representing a veteran whose service had been honored by our corporate community. The wall had become a pilgrimage site for veterans interviewing with the company, a tangible symbol that their sacrifice was valued rather than merely tolerated. 1 year after Jake's termination, I stood before the memorial during its dedication ceremony, surrounded by colleagues, families, and dignitaries who had gathered to witness the formal completion of our transformation. The wall represented more than recognition. It embodied the cultural change that had spread from our crisis to become an industry model. "This memorial doesn't just honor the past," Sarah announced to the assembled crowd. "It commits us to the future, to ensuring that every veteran who walks through our doors understands their worth, their welcome, and their potential for advancement." The plaques represented a diverse cross-section of military service. World War II veterans who had built the technology industry, Vietnam veterans who had persevered through challenging transitions, Gulf War veterans who had bridged military and civilian worlds, and recent veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan who were shaping the industry's future. My father's plaque was among them, representing the Army engineer whose service in Korea had inspired my own military career. Sarah had insisted on including family members of current employees, understanding that military service was often a multi-generational commitment that shaped entire families. "This honors everyone who chose service over self," I said during my remarks at the ceremony. "It reminds us that the freedom to innovate, to build companies, to pursue dreams, comes at a cost that some are willing to pay for all of us." The letter, in my jacket pocket, had arrived that morning, handwritten on yellow legal paper with the careful penmanship of someone taking time to choose words precisely. Jake's apology was hesitant but genuine, acknowledging harm caused and responsibility. "Accepted. I know I can't undo the damage I caused," he'd written, "but I want you to know that watching your success and the changes at TechFlow has taught me lessons I should have learned long ago. Your service deserved respect, not discrimination. I'm sorry it took my failures to help me understand that." The letter had surprised me with its impact, not because it changed anything fundamental. The discrimination had been wrong, regardless of Jake's eventual understanding, but because it represented the kind of growth that made redemption possible. Personal transformation was always an individual choice, but it was encouraging to see evidence that change was possible even for those who had seemed irredeemably biased. The statistics Sarah presented during the ceremony were remarkable but not surprising. Veteran employment at TechFlow Solutions had increased by 63% over the past year. Retention rates for military personnel had reached company highs. Most significantly, veterans were advancing to leadership positions at rates that exceeded their representation in the general employee population. "We're not just employing veterans," Sarah explained to the gathered crowd. "We're leveraging their unique capabilities to strengthen our competitive position and improve our performance. Across every metric that matters, the industry impact was equally impressive. The consortium of tech companies that had adopted similar Programs now included over 200 organizations across Silicon Valley and beyond. The model was being replicated in other industries, from healthcare to finance to manufacturing. But the most meaningful measure of success was the changed lives represented in the audience. Veterans who had struggled with workplace discrimination were now thriving in leadership roles. Military spouses had found career opportunities that accommodated deployment schedules. Recent veterans were discovering that their service was an asset rather than a liability. The program had evolved beyond employment support to comprehensive career development. Mentorship networks connected veterans across different experience levels and industry sectors. Leadership development programs prepared military personnel for executive advancement. Entrepreneurship initiatives supported veterans starting their own companies. "You've created something that will outlast all of us," observed General Morrison, who had traveled from Washington to participate in the ceremony. "This isn't just a corporate program, it's a movement that's changing how America values military service." The personal transformation had been equally profound. The discrimination that had threatened to end my corporate career had instead launched a mission that was more fulfilling than anything I'd previously experienced. The integration of military identity and civilian aspirations had created opportunities for service that honored both commitments. The veterans I worked with had become more than colleagues. They were a community united by shared values and mutual support. The monthly gatherings had evolved into networks that extended beyond professional development to genuine friendship and care for one another's success. "We've built something special here," reflected Tommy Wu, now a senior manager whose Marine Corps leadership was being recognized throughout the industry. "This is what corporate culture should look like: diverse, inclusive, and focused on bringing out the best in everyone." As the ceremony concluded and guests moved toward the reception, I found myself studying the memorial wall with quiet satisfaction. Each plaque represented a story of service and sacrifice, but collectively they told a larger story about values that transcended individual experience. The crisis that had begun with Jake's prejudice had become an opportunity for transformation that reached far beyond any individual's career or company's policies. The discrimination that was meant to silence veterans had instead amplified their voices and created platforms for influence that benefited entire communities. The memorial wall would stand as a permanent reminder that some things were worth fighting for, that standing up for principles could create change far beyond immediate circumstances, and that service to country could continue in different forms throughout a lifetime. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bronze plaques, each one catching light that seemed to honor not just individual service, but the collective commitment, two values that made both military service and corporate success possible. The wall would inspire future generations of veterans, while reminding all employees that their work was connected to something larger than quarterly profits or market share. The transformation was complete, but the mission continued. The foundation was solid, the direction was clear, and the possibilities for continued service were limitless.